No one ever tells you how love can quietly fracture your sense of self, like a mirror cracked by an unseen hand. That's how I felt, shattered, yet somehow still trying to piece myself together in the silence that followed. I was 28, exhausted from the weight of grief I carried like an old worn coat, damp, heavy and impossible to shed. Grief for a life I'd lost, and the loneliness that crept in when I realized no one really saw the shadows I hid behind my eyes. It was a rainy evening when I first stepped into the bookstore on Main Street, the kind where the air smells of damp paper and coffee, thick with the scent of old pages and fresh anticipation. The bell above the door chimed softly as I entered, and I was immediately enveloped in a world of quiet murmurs and the faint crackle of a distant radio. I loved that place, the cluttered shelves, the way the light flickered irregularly above the cash register like a dying star. I was seeking solace in the familiar chaos, hoping to find a fragment of myself among the stacks. That's when I saw him. He was leaning against a shelf, arms crossed, with an intensity that seemed to cut through the haze of my grief. His gaze was fixed on me, unblinking, as if he'd been waiting for me all along. His eyes had that unsettling quality, like they saw too much, like they knew what I was hiding. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, the kind that whispers of secrets better left buried. His presence was oddly magnetic, drawing me closer despite the instinct warning me to keep my distance. He spoke first, voice calm and measured, like he had rehearsed the words in a dream. "You're looking for something that's already found you," he said, as if quoting a poem I'd never heard. I blinked, unsure if I'd imagined the words, or if they had come from some part of me I tried to forget. The way he said it felt like a cryptic promise or a warning. I laughed nervously, trying to mask the flicker of unease. His words felt too deliberate, too precise. Then he reached out, his hand brushing my hair away from my face, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. The touch was too gentle, yet somehow invasive, like an invasive thought suddenly made flesh. I froze, caught between fear and fascination. His eyes flickered to mine, intense and unyielding, as if he was trying to read the next chapter of my life before I even knew it was written. A small poem fell off a nearby shelf, fluttering down like a leaf caught in a gust. I watched it land between us. An accidental omen or a silent invitation? The room seemed to pulse with a flickering overhead light, casting shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls. I felt the weight of my loneliness deepen, strange yet familiar, like an old ache that refused to fade. That night, I wondered about the man who seemed to see through my defenses so effortlessly. I felt a strange pull, like I was standing at the edge of a precipice, uncertain if I was about to fall or soar. But beneath it all, a quiet voice whispered that I might already be lost, already in his grasp, even if I hadn't realized it yet. And I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps I had crossed a line I wasn't meant to return from. He remembered small things I said as if they were treasures, repeating them later with a softness that made me feel understood in a way I had never experienced before. It was as if my words, my thoughts, had become his map, guiding him closer into my world. And I found myself craving that feeling of being truly seen. One night, I mentioned how I loved the scent of rain on dry earth, and the next day, he brought me a tiny jar of crushed leaves and petrichor oil, his eyes shining with a quiet pride that made me believe I was the only one who mattered that much to him. He shared stories of his own scars, not just the physical ones, but the moments where he felt lost, vulnerable, like he was laying bare a piece of his soul to match my own. It was a dangerous kind of intimacy, one that wrapped around me like a warm blanket, making me forget the shadows lurking just beyond the glow. "No one sees the world like you do," he whispered one evening, voice low and reverent, as if my perspective was some rare, sacred gift only he was lucky enough to witness. That praise, so oddly possessive, seeped into my mind, and I began to believe that our connection was something rare, almost fated. A bond that could defy everything I once thought I knew. He had a way of making me feel special, chosen. It was in the way he looked at me, in the subtle gestures concealed as tenderness. One night, he gently brushed my hand, then held it a moment longer than necessary. "Promise me you'll always tell me everything," he said softly, eyes fixed on mine, and I nodded automatically, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in my chest. It was an unspoken vow, a promise to be always honest, always close, like a tether that kept me anchored even when the world outside threatened to pull me away. But beneath that surface of devotion, I sensed an undercurrent of control, a quiet insistence on knowing more, on shaping my world in ways I couldn't quite see yet. He would glance at my phone when I wasn't looking, then ask in a gentle, almost innocent tone, "Do they really know you like I do?" It sounded like a question of concern, but I felt the subtle command behind it, an invitation to share only what he wanted to hear, to trust him with my secrets. I rationalized it as devotion, a way of showing he cared, but deep down I knew there was something else, a shadow flickering behind his words. One evening he handed me a small, delicate flower, its petals matching the ink of a tattoo I had. "It's like you," he said, his voice strangely reverent as he placed it in my palm. I watched as he mirrored my gestures unconsciously, as if trying to align himself with my every move. Then he reached out and gently touched a faded photograph I kept tucked away, an old journal from my past, and whispered, "This makes me feel closer to you." The intimacy of that moment left me breathless, caught between warmth and unease. I found myself answering him faster, canceling plans without hesitation, eager for his approval, craving the sense of being needed. Every message from him became a lifeline, each word weaving me tighter into this fragile web. I was afraid to disappoint him, though I couldn't always explain why. It felt like devotion, but sometimes I wondered if I was losing myself in the process, reshaping my world around his needs. And yet a small voice inside warned me. Something about this felt fragile, dangerous. I told myself it was love, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was slowly disappearing into him. If obsession is protection, then what am I really safe from? He made me feel like I mattered, but I started to wonder, at what cost? It started with tiny interruptions, like a whisper in the back of my mind that refused to fade away. I'd find my thoughts slipping from my own, tangled in his voice, as if I'd been speaking to myself and he'd somehow hijacked the words. It was subtle, an image flickering on the edge of my vision, a song I was sure I'd forgotten, but then he'd mention it as if he'd known all along. My days felt like smudged chalk, once clear, now impossible to trace. Nothing was quite solid anymore, everything bleeding into a fog I couldn't brush away. He'd show up unexpectedly, even when I wasn't expecting him. "I was in the neighborhood," he'd say softly, as if that explained everything. I'd be in the middle of making coffee or scrolling through my phone, and suddenly, there he was in my space, inserting himself into my routine like a shadow I couldn't shake. His visits became routine, almost comforting, but beneath that surface, I sensed something tighter, more calculated. He'd send voice notes, dozens a day, checking where I was, who I was with, as if he needed to monitor my every move to keep me safe. He started suggesting I spend less time with friends, with family. "They stress you out," he'd whisper, voice gentle but firm, like a soothing balm that always left a slight sting. I'd nod, even when I knew I wanted to argue, because arguing felt like risking everything. My schedule began to shift under his quiet influence. Meals at specific times, rest hours aligned with his convenience. I caught myself laughing when I wanted to cry, rehearsing responses to avoid upsetting him, hiding parts of myself just to keep the peace. Sometimes I'd catch myself recalling a conversation, only to hear him deny it. "I never said that, babe. You're misremembering again." He'd say, voice calm but dismissive, and I'd question myself, was I losing my memory? Or had I always been this unreliable? My mind felt fractured. Sometimes I'd forget what I just thought, or I'd second-guess my instincts. Like I was a wallpaper peeling at the edges, the pattern fading, the image of who I was blurring into a vague, indistinct background. I told myself he was just scared to lose me. That's what I kept repeating, trying to cling to the idea that he cared. But deep down I wondered, why did it feel like I was the one disappearing? Every choice felt like a betrayal of myself. I canceled plans without explanation, laughed at jokes I didn't find funny, and rehearsed responses to keep him happy. I hid parts of what I felt, what I thought, because I was afraid that if I let them show, I'd lose everything. Sometimes I'd ask myself, is this love? Or am I just convincing myself it is, to hold on? I felt like my world was shrinking, quieter, smaller. Like someone was turning down the volume on my life, making it easier to ignore the growing emptiness inside. And yet, I couldn't quite pinpoint when I'd stopped recognizing the person I used to be. All I knew was that each time I stayed silent, each time I let his voice drown out my own, I wondered if I was choosing peace or surrender. Every time I closed a door for him, I felt a strange ache, as if I was leaving a part of myself behind. I told myself it was for peace, for simplicity, for avoiding conflict. But deep down, I knew I was sacrificing something essential. I deleted the social app one used to connect with friends, convinced it was just a distraction he didn't like. It felt like a small act, but I could still feel the hollow ache of losing a piece of my own voice. I didn't argue or protest. I just did it quietly, as if surrendering was the only way to keep the peace he seemed to crave. He never demanded outright. Instead, he'd say, "You used to be more loving," in that gentle tone that made me question whether I'd always been enough. Sometimes he'd suggest I was changing, that I no longer cared the way I once did. I'd nod, feeling a flicker of guilt, trying to convince myself I was just tired or distracted. I told myself I was doing it for us, that giving up my hobbies was a small price to pay for his affection. So I stopped painting, hid the brushes in the back of a drawer, and avoided the mirror I used to love to look into. I didn't want him to see the parts of me that felt distant, fragile. I remember the moment I chose to skip my birthday celebration because he didn't feel like going. It wasn't that I didn't want to celebrate. I did desperately, but his disinterest weighed on me more than my own desire. I told myself I was being considerate, that I didn't want to ruin his day. But I felt the subtle ache of neglect, like I was erasing my own happiness to keep him comfortable. Every small act of self-denial felt like a brick in a wall I was unknowingly building around myself. His praise when I silenced my voice was almost addictive. "You've become so understanding," he'd say softly, as if my quiet compliance was a virtue. I smiled for him, but I don't think it reached my eyes anymore. I was becoming the echo of someone he approved of, not myself. My thoughts grew quieter, more distant, as if I was gradually losing the ability to speak my mind. I caught myself avoiding the mirror, wondering if I still recognized the person staring back. He never yelled, but I could feel the weight of his gaze, the subtle pressure in his words. When he suggested I was changing or not caring enough, guilt pressed against my chest, heavy and unrelenting. I didn't argue. Instead, I sank deeper into the silence I had created. It felt like I was shrinking, folding into a version of myself that was easier to contain, easier to control. The person I once was seemed to drift further away, like a faint whisper I could no longer reach. Sometimes I wondered if I was still me, or just the reflection he allowed me to be. I could feel parts of me slipping away, dissolving into the quiet, fragile space I had carved out for him. I was tired, exhausted by the constant act of holding myself together. I knew I was losing more than I could see, but I kept telling myself I was still holding on. Deep down, I sensed that the cracks were spreading, that one day, the pieces would fall apart completely, leaving nothing behind but a faint echo of who I once was. My reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar, distorted, as if someone else had taken over my face. I avoided it whenever I could, afraid of what I might see, an alien shadow, a hollowed-out version of myself. The days blurred into each other. I woke up not knowing what moment I was in, the calendar on my phone replaced by a wallpaper of swirling patterns, my memories slipping away like water through clenched fists. Sometimes, I'd catch myself whispering answers to questions I didn't remember asking, as if a stranger's voice had taken residence inside my head. It felt like I was losing the ability to tell where I ended and he began. His presence grew more invasive, more precise in severing my sense of self. He would change the wallpaper on my phone, replacing my favorite images with ones that felt cold and unfamiliar, as if rewriting my world from the outside in. My journal, once filled with my thoughts and dreams, was gone, replaced overnight with a new one that he insisted I start, as if my past pages had been erased to prevent me from remembering my own voice. He deleted playlists I had curated, replacing them with melodies he made, each song a subtle reminder that my choices no longer mattered. I caught myself repeating his truths, not my own, as if I had been programmed to echo his narrative, my voice a ghost echoing in the hollow chambers of my mind. Sometimes I'd wake up with no memory of the day before, my thoughts fragmented, scattered like broken glass. I'd try to piece together what I'd been doing, but the images refused to form. Blurred faces, muffled voices, fleeting sensations that felt like dreams slipping away at dawn. Even my own thoughts felt like they belonged to someone else, a stranger dictating my internal dialogue. I would catch glimpses of myself in the mirror, but it was like viewing an old photograph, faded, distant, unrecognizable. I knew I was still there, somewhere behind the fog, but I couldn't reach her. He would dismiss my doubts with a calm, dismissive tone. "That never happened," he'd say, as if my memories were illusions he could rewrite at will. "You're just overreacting," he'd add, making me doubt my reactions, my feelings, my perceptions. He told me I needed to let go of my contacts, my friends, for my own good, framing it as protection, but I knew it was a way to keep me isolated, to keep me tethered to him alone. His control seeped into every corner of my mind, weaving a web that I was slowly becoming entangled in. A part of me still clung to love, to the illusion that maybe he was the only one who truly saw me. But another part, quieter and more desperate, screamed silently for freedom. I felt like I was being rewritten in his handwriting, my original self dissolving into a script I no longer recognized. My thoughts, my memories, my very identity. The pieces that once made me whole were fragmenting, dissolving into shadows. And as I stared into the mirror now, I wondered if I was still there at all, or if I had already vanished, leaving only a faint echo of the girl I used to be. The world around me had begun to warp in ways I couldn't quite explain, as if reality itself was slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. One morning I caught my reflection in the mirror and saw it move out of sync with me. Eyes flickering, lips curling in a way I didn't recognize. I reached out to touch the glass, but my reflection lingered for a moment longer than I did, as if it was a stranger's ghost trapped behind the surface. The more I stared, the more I felt my own face become a foreign mask, a hollow vessel I no longer understood. I picked up a pen and stared at my handwriting, expecting my familiar scrawl, but the words looked strange, unfamiliar, like someone else's handwriting had been smudged onto the page. I couldn't recall when I'd written it or why. The ink blurred into meaningless scribbles, and I felt a cold dread settle deep in my chest. Had I written this? Was it even me? My sense of time had dissolved. Minutes, hours, they bled into each other. My surroundings seemed to shift subtly, shadows stretching longer, colors dulling like a faded photograph. It was as if the walls themselves were breathing, changing shape when I wasn't looking. Then I heard him, his voice, but not from the room. It echoed inside my mind, louder than my own thoughts, more insistent. "You're safe," he whispered, but it sounded like a command. I froze, trembling, as if I'd been caught in a web spun from my own subconscious, and I couldn't tell whether the voice was real or a hallucination. I started questioning everything, the memories I clung to, the feelings I thought were mine. Were they mine at all? Or had he planted them like seeds in my mind? I remembered laughing at a joke I'd never heard, crying over a loss I didn't remember experiencing, all orchestrated by his voice, echoing inside my head. Even my dreams had rules now, and those rules belonged to him. I'd wake up feeling like I'd been transported into someone else's nightmare, with fragments of his words buried deep within my subconscious, whispering when I was supposed to be asleep. I couldn't trust my thoughts. They felt like warped reflections, distorted by his influence. My memories, once clear, now felt fragile, like fragile glass shattered into shards I couldn't piece together. I'd catch glimpses of moments I thought were mine, only to realize they were fabricated or reworked by him. Somewhere in the back of my mind I fought to hold on. A faint flicker of resistance sparkled. An image I thought I'd lost. A photograph tucked behind a drawer, my own handwriting on a scrap of paper, a childhood memory that felt disconnected from the darkness that now consumed me. I clung to that fragment, desperately trying to believe I was still in there, buried beneath the layers of his manipulation. There was a whisper beneath the silence, a fragile breath that I hoped was my own. Maybe I was still somewhere inside, fighting to stay alive. I needed to remember before I forgot everything again, before I lost myself entirely. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of light, a faint corner of my own existence. But even that might have been just another shadow, another trick of my fractured mind. And yet I held on to it because somewhere deep inside, I knew I couldn't let go completely. Not yet. Not without a fight. My breath hitched as I suddenly remembered the voice I'd heard earlier, soft, whispering my name from somewhere beneath the floorboards. It was impossible, I told myself. Just my mind twisting in the dark. But then I found it. A small crumpled scrap of paper tucked behind a loose tile in the basement. I unfolded it with trembling fingers, and the words blurred together, written in a hurried, shaky hand. My own name repeated over and over, as if someone had scribbled it in a frantic panic. I stared, heart pounding, realizing I'd seen that handwriting before. On my journal, on old notes I'd dismissed as scribbles from a long-forgotten childhood. Suddenly, a wave of nausea washed over me. My vision blurred, and I felt my mind splinter, like a glass left in boiling water, fragments scattering in every direction. I screamed, but no sound escaped. Instead, an oppressive silence pressed against my ears, thick and suffocating. I was frozen, caught between understanding and disbelief, as if my very sense of reality was unraveling before my eyes. I looked around, desperate for something, anything that could anchor me. The basement walls seemed to breathe, the shadows shifting in ways I couldn't comprehend. I pressed my palms against my temples, trying to hold myself together, but the chaos had already taken root. Memories flickered, moments I'd never experienced, words I'd never spoken. Like someone was rewriting my history with a cruel, invisible hand. Was I losing my mind? Or had it already been taken? A sudden flash of something from my childhood emerged. An old photograph I'd hidden away, but now it stared back at me. The face was mine, but altered, eyes darker, expression hollow. I clutched it, trembling, tears spilling down my face as my mind dissolved into 1,000 shards. Was I even real? Or just a ghost of a person he had created? My reflection in the cracked mirror on the wall stared back, distorted and unfamiliar, whispering lies I couldn't discern from the truth. My chest heaved with shallow breaths as panic set in, a relentless tide threatening to drown me. I questioned everything, my memories, my senses, my very existence. Maybe I'd been gone all along, just waiting to be found or erased. Maybe I'd never been alive at all, only a fragment he'd molded and twisted. A cold, dark voice inside me whispered that I was already slipping away, swallowed by the shadows I'd tried to escape. And yet, amidst the chaos, a faint spark of clarity flickered. I knew I wasn't okay. Not even close. My mind was a battlefield of fractured truths and shattered illusions. I stood there, fists clenched, trembling, whispering my own name, trying to remember if it still belonged to me. Something inside me cracked. An invisible fracture that echoed through my bones, and for the first time I didn't flinch when it did, because I realized I wasn't just losing myself. I might already be gone. And in that hollow, trembling space I faced the horrifying truth. I was at the edge of everything, teetering on a precipice I couldn't see, with no choice but to wait for what came next. I was making tea, the familiar ritual grounding me in a moment I thought I controlled. The steam curled softly from the mug, and I took a breath, trying to find some semblance of normalcy. But then, a message blinked on my phone screen. A single line, simple and impossible to ignore. "Are you okay?" I froze, my hand trembling as I stared at the words. It wasn't from anyone I knew. It was from someone I thought had abandoned me. Someone I'd convinced myself was just a ghost in my fractured mind. Yet there it was, clear and insistent. My eyes darted around the room, searching for an answer that wasn't there. And then I saw it. A photo, one I had no memory of taking, appearing on my screen. I recognized my face, but the background was unfamiliar, distorted. I didn't remember standing there, didn't remember clicking the shutter. The image seemed to pulse, alive with a silent mockery. It was a trap, I realized, a mirror of my own mind twisted into something unrecognizable. My heart pounded as I reached for the mirror. My reflection stared back, distorted. Eyes too wide, smile too fixed. My own face seemed to flicker, as if the person staring was someone else, someone I no longer knew. I caught movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow lurking just beyond the glass. I looked again, my reflection was changing subtly, almost imperceptibly. I saw my hand raise, brushing my hair with a rhythm that wasn't mine, as if my body had been trained to move on its own. I could feel the cold sweat on my skin, the faint prickle of dread crawling up my spine. A noise, soft, almost inaudible, sounded from the closet. I hesitated, then opened it. There, hanging with an eerie stillness, was a dress I had no memory buying. Its fabric felt strange beneath my fingers, as if it carried a story I was never meant to hear. I looked at my closet door, slightly ajar, and saw a faint smear of lipstick on the handle, a detail I knew I hadn't put there. My own handwriting appeared on a scrap of paper I swore I'd never written. A sentence I didn't remember forming, yet it was there, scrawled in hurried, deliberate strokes. The room felt wrong, as if the walls had shifted, closing in. I could hear a whisper, soft, insidious, calling my name. I realized I'd never made that call, never sent that message. My mind was unraveling, threads slipping through my fingers. Every piece of my reality was unraveling, staged, manipulated, stolen. Memories I trusted felt hollow, rehearsed, like actors reciting lines in a play I never auditioned for. And then the silence broke. A quiet, piercing thought whispered that I'd never loved him, that the love I'd believed in was just a carefully constructed cage. Every "I love you," a lock clicking shut. I saw it now, he hadn't fallen for me. He'd built me, piece by piece, using my own fears, my hopes, my vulnerabilities as raw material. I was never his partner, I was his creation, his possession. A cold, suffocating truth settled over me. I had been erased, molded into something I didn't recognize. I was a ghost in my own life, a shadow of someone else's design. And as I stared at the fractured reflection, I knew I couldn't stay in this illusion anymore. I had to break free, to shatter the story he'd written on my skin, before there was nothing left of me at all, because I wasn't his. I never was. And that realization, that truth, terrified him more than anything. I waited until I was sure he was asleep, his breathing steady, the house silent. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat echoing the fear that I was about to do something I could never undo. Carefully, I reached for my phone, trembling so violently I thought it might slip from my hand. It was the first real step I'd taken toward reclaiming a sliver of myself, even if I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing. My mind raced. What if he woke? What if I was wrong, and the house was already watching me, listening? I knew better than to trust my instincts anymore. Trauma had rewired them, made every sound suspicious, every shadow a threat. I whispered to myself, trying to steady my trembling fingers. This is the only way, I told myself. Just a message. Just a sign I'm still in there somewhere. I hesitated, then pressed send, the screen flickering as the message tried to leave my trembling fingertips. But even as I did it, I felt the familiar weight of doubt pressing against my chest. What if he already knew? What if he was watching me now? My fingers shook so badly I thought they might betray me, reveal everything. Still, I forced myself to move, to slip out of the room, quiet as a ghost. Every step felt like walking through thick fog. My senses dulled, my instincts dulled, like I was no longer the one in control. Every door I passed seemed locked, every creak in the house a potential trap. What if he was already in my head, waiting for me to slip? Even the silence around me was oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath, watching, listening. My breath hitched and I clutched my chest, feeling the suffocating weight of it all. I made it to the door, almost. I could see the hallway stretching out before me, an open door just beyond, promising freedom. But as I reached out, my hand trembling so badly I thought it might fall off, I caught a glimpse of something. A shadow flickered at the corner of my eye. An unlit camera, or maybe just my mind playing tricks. My stomach clenched. Was he watching me even now? I froze, heart racing so loud I thought it would burst from my chest. And then, just as I was about to step forward again, everything shattered. I heard the faintest sound, an almost inaudible whisper, like my name being called from far away. My blood ran cold. I jerked my head around, but the hallway was empty. Only silence. Only the oppressive, suffocating silence. In that moment I saw it, the torn fragment of a photograph I'd kept hidden. I grabbed it, clutching it tightly, feeling the edges dig into my palm. I tore it free from my bag, ripping through the layers of time and control, desperate to break away from what he'd made me. The picture crumpled, the face I barely recognized staring back at me, blurred and broken. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just stood there, trembling, clutching the shredded piece of my past. I knew, I could feel it, that I hadn't escaped yet. Not truly. That I was still exposed, still vulnerable. And I had cracked the glass, yes, but I could still see him watching through it, waiting for me to slip again. The final confrontation loomed close, and I wondered, would I be strong enough to face it? Or would I finally disappear altogether, swallowed by everything I was trying to escape?